What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. So, every now and again, I get a subtle reminder that a lot of what we do here is still very much at a hobbyist level. So, this is by most people's definition a professional coral farm. But when I went over to the Netherlands, one of the places that I visited was DeJong Marinelife. And I had heard about DeJong before. It is one of the largest, if not the largest, wholesaler over in the EU. I've known that they are very famous for their fish breeding operation, but until you see it in person and really walk through their entire setup, it's really hard to get a good picture of just how impressive and professional they are. So in this video, I wanted to just give you some of the highlights of the things that I saw there. It's difficult to get an idea of the scale of DeJong Marinelife. When we were getting the grand tour, they had mentioned something like there's 80 something employees. Tidal Gardens, as of this recording, is 6 full-time staff, so 80 is considerably larger. It is also a sprawling, interconnected campus of buildings. So even when you're going through the main tour, it's like, okay, you're seeing one very large building that specializes in such and such. And you go to the next building, and it's doing something entirely different. And then there's more buildings, and then there's more and more and more. So on an initial visit, it's very overwhelming. But like I said, I will point out some of the really interesting things that I saw. All right, number one, the first thing that we were shown was this gigantic SPS-dominated show tank. From what I understand, this display was a part of their Interzoo booth from years past, and it was reset up in their actual office facilities. It is full of super healthy fish and corals, some rare fish from what I understand. A couple of observations as far as this tank goes. One is it is like this Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to the serviceability of the tank. So one thing I loved about it was that its sump and equipment was off to the side. It wasn't really located underneath a stand or anything like that. So everything was very, very kind of open and easy to access there as far as equipment. The Mr. Hyde part of it was that the access to the aquarium itself was very constrained. So first of all, it's a very tall aquarium. And if you've ever had a tall aquarium over 24 inches tall, it's tricky to get into, even on the best of days. Like I've got pretty long arms and my show tanks here are 24 inches. It's tricky to reach the bottom of them, especially if you're talking about particularly wide tanks, challenging. But then every single inch after 24 inches is that much more difficult. So a 36-inch tank, deep tank, that's an ordeal. Like you're practically snorkeling at that point. This particular show tank was even more challenging to maintain because there's not a lot of clearance from the top of the aquarium to the ceiling. A lot of that has to do with like the height of the stand plus the height of the aquarium. But also in this particular room, I think that the ceilings are a little bit lower than what we typically see in the US. So there's only, I don't know, what looks to be like 18 inches to access the top of this tank. It must be a joy to get stuff in and out of there. However, given those constraints, the tank is doing super well. And I will point your attention to one particular acropora that I saw in there because it is like completely engulfed in what looks like mesenterial filaments. And I was talking with some of like my travel group. I was hanging out with Julian Sprung, Alex from Abiz, and Joe Yaulo from Long Island Aquarium. And they're like, yeah, actually, it's super common to see that, especially in acropora that are very well fed, because that is a feeding response. Now that I think of it, the times where I do see that in my systems is when we are really diligent about feeding amino acids. So if you happen to see something like that in your aquariums, that's likely what's going on. Anyways, moving on. Number 2. So I mentioned before that this is one of the largest wholesale facilities in the entire continent. So they do quite a lot of wild coral and wild fish intake. So you can see some of these facilities here. The really, really interesting part of their operation, though, has to be their fish breeding. I don't know the exact count, but from what I understand, I think that they are into the hundreds of different species that they have breeding. I don't know a heck of a lot about breeding. Like right now, I've got a couple of blue-green chromis in my SPS tank that they are probably breeding. They've kind of isolated themselves away from the rest of the school, and they're camping out in a single acropora colony. So chances are they are breeding. Not like there's going to be anything that comes from that in my systems. But here, they have a lot of really interesting activity going on. I mean, lots of clownfish, lots of seahorses. That's kind of, I don't know, old hat when it comes to breeding. But I saw these extremely large, deep aquariums. And they have like a mix of different fish. So there will be like anthias with angelfish, with butterfly fish, with perhaps some oddball wrasses, and who knows what else. The size of the aquarium is important because the pressure of the water matters in terms of getting them to want to spawn. And I'm like wondering, how do you go about collecting anything in these aquariums? Because like I said, they're very big. They must be every bit of like 5 feet deep. And there's like this mix of different fish. Being unfamiliar with the whole fish breeding thing, like everything seems incredibly novel and incredibly interesting because I guess it is possible based on the size of the eggs and the larvae and all the gametes and everything like that to separate them based on like their density and size and weights and stuff like that. At Vivarium, the trade show that I went to as well, DeJong Marinelife had a booth there, and they were showcasing one of these collection boxes. So this collection box contraption has like this passive overflow. The entire unit floats in the water, and it's designed mainly for public aquariums that want to engage in some kind of breeding activity. Because in some of these large public aquariums, how do they collect larvae, right? Something like Joe Yaulo in his 20,000 gallon reef. So this particular box, based on like the flow rate of the different chambers in it, is able to separate out the different eggs by species of fish. And you can dial in what species of fish you want based on like the bubble rate, and that generates a specific amount of flow per chamber. It's entirely possible that you can dial this thing in. So in chamber 1, you're collecting all the eggs and sperm from butterfly fish. The next one, angelfish. Next one, wrasses. And just like go down the line. Like super, super crazy interesting. Like I don't even know how you come up with this stuff. Okay. Number 3. This is something that I want to dabble in. And seeing it done professionally makes me really gun shy to try it now. And that is culturing my own phytoplankton and zooplankton. I've done some cursory reading on the topic. I think that there's probably a lot of benefits to breeding this stuff yourself and feeding your corals, feeding your fish potentially. I guess the difficulty with culturing the stuff isn't just bubbling salt water, it's the sterilization technique involved. The lengths that DeJong Marinelife goes to accomplish sterilization is maddening. Like, it makes me think that I can't do it. Most of the reason why they're doing the sterilization stuff is because they need to keep their cultures of phyto and zooplankton clean of bacterial infection. So, first off, to describe what these rooms look like, every single room looks like it's tiled like a bathroom almost. The tile goes, pretty much from floor all the way up to through the walls to what looks like the ceiling. The ceiling itself looks like something you can spray down. And when I was asking the staff about that, they said that they spray the walls, ceiling, and floor down multiple times a day with antiseptic. And in addition, everybody there is wearing like boots, and they have to soak their feet between rooms. They have to clean their hands with an antiseptic spray every single time that they change rooms. We have no ability to do that kind of biosecurity here. So I'm like, geez, do I really want to do this or do I just buy it? But seeing their operation is super cool. Like they have like these large socks that they have of plastic, and that's what they're doing. They're culturing in. It's basically packing material, and they're able to like heat seal one side, cut it, and just start up a new sock. And ever so often they have to like restart these cultures because eventually, bacteria often does win out despite your best efforts. And I know that like they have kind of like an inter-office competition as to like how long they can keep their cultures going. It's kind of interesting. Okay, number 4. This kind of has to do with their lab facilities. We like to call certain areas of our workplace the lab, but it's not really a lab. I mean, we don't actually have an autoclave here. There's no ventilation hoods or anything like that. It's not really a lab. It's more like a workbench, right? DeJong Marinelife has labs, like for real labs. And it is, again, humbling to see a true professional operation in this regard. Because like the guys are explaining to me how the HVAC, I think, always provides positive pressure into those laboratory spaces. So it's constantly forcing air out. So there's no like random air coming in that's not extremely like HEPA filtered and disinfected. The air itself seems like it's constantly being treated. Like it has a certain odor to it and a certain humidity in the air. Very, very difficult to explain, but the entire place just feels very, very clean. They have like, super high-end laboratory equipment. And first thing I noticed is obviously like things like the microscopes and stuff. But the more you look at it, the more you tend to see some of the crazy technology that they've got going on. Like, for example, there's like this warning label in a particular room about like powerful magnets. And in that room, they more or less have what amounts to like a giant, powerful industrial magnet, like practically an MRI. And what they're using it for is that they are hatching so much Artemia, like brine shrimp, baby brine, for their breeding operations, that they're using like the magnetized brine shrimp eggs, and they're hatching so much that they need like industrial level of separation of the magnetized shell casings and husks from the hatched baby brine. Like usually when people do this on a home scale, they just like have like a little magnet, but these people are like flowing water through this thing to separate out the actual live larvae from like the shell casings and cysts and stuff. The other thing is they're able to do what amounts to like very advanced aquaculture techniques. I'll give you like a perfect example. I am looking to eventually do some spawning of sea urchins, tuxedo urchins. And that's going to involve doing some phyto. It also involves, some cresol tanks. DeJong is also doing some breeding of sea urchins. And I'm like, cool. It's like, I'd love to see that. They're like, yeah. In addition to doing the spawning of the urchins, we're also cryo freezing the larvae so that we can wake them up later when we need particular larvae of that stage. I'm like, okay, you can do that? That's a thing? And he's like, yeah, it's like it's a very documented scientific process, but it's not a simple process, and it's not very easy. And I'm like looking at this dude and I'm like, bro, literally nothing you just said sounds simple or easy. But again, it's one of those things where at a certain level, you're going to get exposed to some really cutting edge techniques. And it is a marvel that some of this stuff is possible. On to a topic that is a little bit more accessible to you and me, and that is the filtration methods that they are using here at DeJong. It is kind of nice to see that a lot of the stuff that they're doing is stuff that we're doing. So it feels like, I'm on the right page, right? They're using very large commercial skimmers. They are using filter rollers, big commercial filter rollers. One thing where we diverge, though, is the use of live rock. And I was asking them about that because oftentimes the big detraction for me with live rock is I'm always worried about introducing pests. And it's not that the pests themselves are really ever that bad, but it's more of like a selling and marketing thing. Like at the time of this video, anyways, it's like a big stigma of pests and having a very clean operation. By the way, it is impossible to have a completely pest-free operation, especially at scale. That is utter nonsense. But DeJong, especially at its scale, is doing a pretty good job with pests. And given how fastidious that they are with like their sterilization technique and everything like that, it's like they're definitely putting in like a redonkulous amount of effort into this. And I'm seeing like the use of live rock. So like how do you reconcile wanting to have so much biological control, yet you're again also using this very wild product as a part of like your main filtration system? And they're like, yes, it's actually a concern of ours. And they go through a process of basically trying to eliminate as much of that as possible by effectively quarantining their rock in a separate system, treating it just like a reef tank, even feeding it, but they're doing it over the course of months. So the idea is that any like obligate corallivore pest type thing will simply run out of its host. That is something that I might want to try in the future because there definitely is a benefit to like a healthier microbiome. A lot of the like the new tank nastiness as far as like algae and stuff like that, a lot of that goes away when you have like a more established system and a lot more substrate like live rock. And the difference between something like that's like a mined rock, like a Marco rock versus a live rock that comes from the ocean, it's worlds different in terms of like porosity and weight and everything like that. So the behavior of that on a microbiological level, I expect is quite different. So again, that is something that I would super like to delve into myself. One last thing that I'll talk about as far as like their filtration goes really isn't so much of their filter, but it is in their sumps. And that is the use of PEX heating coils. This is the only other place on Earth that I've ever seen this used. And we are using natural gas boilers and geothermal cooling to adjust temperatures in our systems. I know that their system is slightly different because I think that they're even doing it more efficiently than us. I think they're recycling heat with a different type of heat pump to heat up those coils. But the fundamental is that they're using like a heating coil, which is kind of interesting. It's fun to see different high-end operations come to like similar technology to accomplish the same tasks. All right, number 6. This is going to be like a pretty small little detail that I picked up on, but it's the feeding carts. For an operation like this, foods and feeding are super important because you have to like, it comes down to like the larvae of all these things require different types of foods. The fish that you hope to breed, you need to feed the heck out of in order for them to go through their healthy breeding process. And one of the things that I saw was that they basically have like these drop-in stainless steel food carts into like an ice bath. And that ice bath maintains temperature throughout the entire day. And they're able just to have like this like fresh refrigerated seafood on demand wherever this cart is. Is that something that we would incorporate here? Probably not. But I think that in applications that do involve a lot more heavy feeding, this sort of thing can be really cool, especially if you're doing like a lot of wild fish intake, because a lot of that boils down to what will that fish eat right now. And sometimes you just have to feed a little bit, sit there and watch it and see if it eats. Doesn't eat that? Okay, next food, see if it eats that. Once you've found something that this particular new fish eats, label that tank, just so the next person feeding will know to try that first. So like stuff like that, like little operational things, I just love. But yes, even down to like organization on the feeding stuff, good stuff. The last really cool thing that I saw at DeJong was they actually have what amounts to a large animal holding facility. They might be able to bring in like big sharks and like manta rays and stuff like that, but they were saying how lately they've been more of like a hotel service for other large public aquariums, and maybe they are redoing their shark exhibit and they need to house their lemon sharks or something like that temporarily for a fee. Again, this is one of those things where me being unfamiliar with that particular job, it seems like indistinguishable from witchcraft to me. Because I was also during this Netherlands trip, we visited the Burger Zoo, and they have gigantic aquariums, gigantic shark tanks. And I'm like, how do you even catch these sharks? Like, how? I can just imagine just getting a job at this particular zoo and being like, hey, Than, we saw something wrong with one of these like reef sharks. Go catch that one. Like, okay, huh? What? But yes, I mean, they are able to like corral these things. And I actually did ask them just at their facility, like, how do you go about getting these sharks? And they're like, oh, yeah, we just like get in the tank and go after them. Which again sounds like so simple, but also, but how? Like, there's no part of me that is swimming after a shark, right? But there are these public aquarium techniques that this has been a problem that's been solved since the 80s and or 70s. Cool to see. All right, guys, that does it from my visit to DeJong Marinelife. If you ever find yourself in the Netherlands and can score a behind-the-scenes tour of this place, it is one of the most impressive facilities that I've ever seen in the whole world. I highly recommend it. Thanks so much to DeJong Marinelife for having me, and I would love to visit again. Take care. Happy reefing.